Good evening and welcome to this final In Focus Candidate Forum on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We'll start popping champagne corks in a little while. This has been a long session for us, and I need to start before I do anything by thanking Steve and Ryan and Caitlin and Samantha and Anthony and Wes, who have been with us since we started this back in early August, as we started talking with superintendents and also school board members and carrying ourselves through. And also I have to thank our administrative coordinator, Michelle Thompson, who has created a lot of the slides and things that you've seen on a week in, week out basis. I appreciate all the work, all the time, all the effort that they have put in, particularly Steve, because he's not a part of the staff, although we think of him as one. He is a community volunteer who has given his time every Thursday for the last couple of months to be here and go through these In Focus candidate forums with us. So we greatly appreciate that. Tonight we'll be speaking with candidates running for the State Senate, District 27, current Senator Jeff Rotz and Jake Hogue. We will talk to them coming up in just a few minutes. We've been going through this process for months because it's time to vote. There is no more time to register or anything of that nature. Voting is begun. Actually, it has begun. Early voting, absentee voting has already taken place, and that still goes through November 2nd, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Also beginning, and also this Saturday, you can do that at the Coleman Center. Also November 3rd at the Coleman Center from 10 to 3. Beginning next week, the vote centers will be open, and you see those 4 locations: the Coleman Center, First English Lutheran Church, Golay Center, and New Testament Church in Hagerstown. If you need more information, obviously there is a number and a website at the bottom of that screen. And then on November 6th, Election Day, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., the voting centers will be open along with some additional locations: the Coleman Center, First English, Mount Olive Baptist Church, which began being a center for voting after Townsend Center was not allowed to reopen. So Mount Olive Baptist Church on North H Street, First Baptist Church, 1601 South A Street, the Golay Center, New Testament Church in Hagerstown, also Wesleyan Church in Fountain City, and Centerville Christian Church. Those locations we will have up on the air. And also, if you watch our Facebook page and also WGTV and WCTV, we've got about 3.5, 4 minutes worth of election information that we got from Debbie Berry earlier today that we'll be putting out there for you, reminding you of those locations and anything else you need to know. And then after all the voting is done, we will be here on Tuesday evening, November 6th, beginning at 6 p.m. I'll be joined by Melissa Vance for live election coverage here from the WCTV studios as we go through and wait for and go through the numbers as we get them from the Wayne County Clerk's office. We think we should be done by about 9 o'clock, but if it is a heavy voting day and people are in line at 6 o'clock in Western Wayne County, that may hold up the counting. We'll hang until we get all of the final results from Wayne County. That, of course, will not include final numbers from all of the races, because obviously we'll have the Wayne County numbers for District 6, we'll have the Wayne County numbers for the Senate seat, District 27, that we'll be talking about tonight, but that encompasses also a wider area. So hopefully you'll join us election night for that. Let's get to this. You're here to hear from 2 candidates that are running for State Senate. We'll give them each about a minute to a minute and a half to provide you with whatever information they want them to know. We'll start with Senator Rotz.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and it's good to see Jake, certainly, as we move forward. I'll stand with you all day long, and that we're ready for the election to be over with on November 6th, certainly not only in Wayne County, but nationally, to get past where we're at. So I also want to say thank you for the service that you and your staff do for Wayne County with the government programming that you do to help inform the voters. It's a good, certainly a good source for folks to see just how people stand on the issues, and so it's important. So it's been an honor for me to serve in the last 4 years in the Indiana General Assembly for Senate District 27. It's comprised of Randolph, Wayne, and Union counties complete, and then parts of Fayette, Franklin, and Dearborn counties. And so the joke is, and Jake will know this being from down there, that I can climb a tree and maybe with a pair of binoculars I can see the Ohio River. So not certain about that, but it goes a long ways down, so it's a long and narrow right up and down the Ohio line. And as I said, it's been an honor and a privilege for me to serve. I count it one of the highlights of my life to have been given the opportunity to serve in the State House for this district. I might also say that you know, I didn't do it without my family's blessing along the way, and so I know it's taken some, you know, from my wife and my family as well. You can't put yourself out there and serve without it costing something, and so I'm grateful for that. And finally, I'd say I thoroughly enjoyed the job. It's if the viewers remember, my hair was a little less gray 4 years ago, so I've gained a little bit. And I'm not certain whether that's just natural age or whether it came with the job. So thank you for hosting us and the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you. And Jake.
I just want to say thank you too, Eric, for allowing me to be here tonight. It's an opportunity for me and Jeff both to let the people out there know what a little bit about what we stand for. I'm sure most of the people don't know who I really am. I'm from Dearborn County, as Jeff mentioned there. I'm probably in the most southern part of this district, and you'll have to go about 20 more miles so you can see the Ohio River.
Okay.
It's close, but I have never been elected to a political office yet. I'm hoping that I have a shot at that this year, and good shot, but that all depends on the voters out there. But I belong on the Planning Commission in Dearborn County. That's basically about the only type of political atmosphere I've been in. As far as myself, I'll be 65 years of age here in about 5 more days. So ain't really looking forward to that, but that's part of getting older, I guess, in life. But 65 years old, been married for 40 years. I've got 3 children, got 4 grandchildren. One of them who I was supposed to celebrate a birthday with tonight, but that got moved back a little bit because they thought this was more important. I kind of disagree with that, but that's fine. So we get to celebrate that tomorrow night. So that'll work fine too. Like I say, the only thing that really I'd like to express to the voters, you need to get out and vote. I mean, it's just been sad over the last probably 20 years or longer. 30% voter turnout, it ain't letting the people really say what they want to say. So we really need to get out and vote. I know people are busy all the time, but that is a right that we were given and something that we shouldn't just let go by the wayside. So I encourage everybody out there to make sure you get out and vote here. Jeff's a good man. Hopefully you think that I may be a good man. So just like I say, I just like to say get out and vote.
Okay. This is a conversation that you can be a part of. Give us a call, 973-8587. If you have a question, you can send your question also on Facebook as well as on Twitter at WCTV Info. You mentioned, Jeff, the political climate. It's part of the conversation, so we'll start with that question. Our country as a whole, obviously, is experiencing really kind of a low point in the way that lawmakers from both political parties are treating each other. Do you believe that this attitude extends to the Indiana General Assembly? And if so, what would you do if elected to try to improve relations in Indianapolis?
That's a good question, and so I'd say to you that it doesn't exist anywhere near what it does at the federal level, and it is of great concern, there's no doubt about it. In Indiana, there's certainly some partisanship, but overall, at the end of the day, at least my experience in the Senate, which I can speak certainly with direct knowledge, it just doesn't exist in that way. And so we could certainly talk about the Republican versus Democrat and the amount of people who are in each, the House and the Senate, may be partially why that's that way. But I'd like to believe that in Indiana we're more civil and behave a little bit better.
from what you've seen, Jeff? Do you think that the partisanship that we're seeing on the national level extends to the Indiana General Assembly? And if so, what do you think, if you were elected, you could do to help improve that?
Well, here in the state of Indiana, I'd probably have to say what Jeff said is probably correct. I wouldn't think there's a great deal of partisanship there. Well, number one, because the Republicans are a supermajority in the House and the Senate and basically the entire state government there. So it's really kind of hard to say, is there any type of partisanship one way or the other? Probably not, strictly because there's more supermajority there. National level, yeah, I think the Democrats and Republicans, they need to start working together. Act like a civil person. That's what needs to be done, and hopefully, as far as I know, that's the way it is in the state. We do act civil here in the state of Indiana.
Okay. I'm going to follow up actually with a comment that you made where you said, just get out and vote. I think Republican or Democrat sitting here that we want people to vote. We want people to be involved in the process. But as you listen to things going around in various other states, that's not always the case. There are some that are trying to make it harder for people to vote. Indiana's voting laws, is there anything that needs to be done to make it easier for people to vote here in the state of Indiana, to make it more open, to make people more welcome?
Honestly, I would think that the state of Indiana has some of the better election laws out there. The only thing I would look at is there any way we could possibly open it up to internet access somehow, being able to vote that way? Because the majority of people do have access to the internet. And like I say, people are busy. They don't have time to get out and drive 10 miles or 20 miles or whatever it is to go vote. That would be a simpler, easier way to get that accomplished. But then with all the cybersecurity that's out there now, that's something that's probably going to be pretty hard to get into place. But honestly, that's something I would like to see get put into place.
Are there ways that the General Assembly might make voting even easier for residents of this state, more accessible?
I think we should be open to, even as Jake has mentioned, differing levels of being able to maybe vote via the internet. But one thing that we need to be strong on is security. So such that we need to be able to identify if Eric Marsh is voting, then we need to make sure that it's Eric Marsh who's actually casting the vote, or Jeff or Jake or whoever it might be. And so as technology progresses, that very well could be possible. There's, as you know, there's all kinds of different issues. The polls are generally done by volunteers, which we're grateful for, but the low ability for folks to, or not ability, but to come out and volunteer becomes an issue. And so we got to be grateful for the system that we have. But I would say I would put security at a top level as well, making sure that if you're casting a vote, you are exactly who you say you are.
Could I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go for it. You're all right. Go for it.
Yeah, that's one thing there. Like Dearborn County down here, the county commissioners just passed a law this past month here. We're actually going to voting centers down there in Dearborn County. That'll be taking place. I think they're going to try and get that in place for the city elections coming up here next year. I know I've volunteered for the past two election cycles. I've worked the polls. Mm-hmm. It's just extremely hard to get people to work the polls. And that's really something that's sad, too. I mean, years ago, when I was 18 years old, just going out and voting, you had to fight to get into the polls. Yeah. I mean, people wanted to work the polls back then, and things have changed, so.
The opioid epidemic is in the headlines every day. Exactly what can the legislature do to help find solutions for this overall problem? And if there is a cost to any potential solution, what is the source of that funding?
Well, that's a difficult question. As we know, it is an epidemic across the state. I think it's died down some in a lot of the conversations which I have almost on a daily basis. the drug of choice maybe has changed a little bit, and I can't tell you that we've hit a home run in our efforts in the state by any means, but there have been a lot of efforts done, and I know that the governor had part of his agenda was to make sure that there were treatment facilities within an hour of every citizen within the state. And so that's one of the big initiatives that have gone on. But as I said, it has died down some. At least it's not in the headlines as much as it was, let's say, a year ago or maybe a year and a half ago or so. It doesn't negate that there's still a huge problem out there. Mm-hmm. But I wonder sometimes whether or not maybe some of the supply has died down in some respects. Maybe would hope that folks who have that issue have sought treatment or maybe other avenues to help themselves, so they watching their friends not live and things along those lines. So I hope they've come to a point where they're making better decisions. Let's put it that way. So when it comes to it overall, as I mentioned, the governor's initiative to make sure that there's treatment available for folks. I guess, and I'd probably reiterate what I said here maybe a few years ago, and that is the crisis came on almost out of the blue, and at least when it got to epidemic portions and the availability of the professionals to deal with it and the brick and mortar and the programs and how we're going to deal with it. I mean, it takes some time to get all that stuff in order. So are we there yet? No, I don't think so. But the efforts are still going forth. We have the MPLEX system so that if you're getting a prescription at one pharmacy, it's reported within a very short period of time, so you can't run to another pharmacy or go to another doctor and get a prescription, and so all that stuff is electronic to try and eliminate some of the multiple prescriptions for people. Those are just a couple things I remember that we've done, but there's still a lot more to do. That's like, as I said, I never say that the state overall has hit a home run in combating this issue, and the federal government has sent some, as I recall, the last amount of money was a little over $10 million to the state to help fight the battle, and as I recall as well, I believe the Trump administration has pledged more to do so as well. So all hands on deck. Have we made a whole lot of progress? I can't answer that question with any level of certainty.
Okay. What can the state legislature do?
Well, number one, we could fill in the rest of this show talking about that, I would think, but I don't know what the state can do, actually, but my own personal opinion, what I think should be done, okay. I would think that the counties should take care of the epidemic on their own in each specific county. There's programs available. I know down in Dearborn County, they have what they call a CASA, or the Citizens Against Substance Abuse. But I think the main thing that people ought to look at is, unless that person who is addicted to whatever drug it is, unless they want to be rehabilitated, I don't really see putting a whole lot of money into trying to get that accomplished. If they don't want to do it, you can give them all the treatment you want, but there's probably still, when they're done, they're going to go right back out there and do it again. Where I work, if we've got an issue there, first thing they'll tell us to do is find the root cause. And I would apply that same principle to the state here. Find the root cause. Number one, is it drugs being prescribed that shouldn't be prescribed? We need to stop that. Stop the drugs from even getting into the state. And my opinion on that, I think we need to put more money into law enforcement to make sure that they can stop drugs coming in from Interstate 75, Interstate 74, Interstate 65. You need to stop it from coming in, whether it's coming in from Canada or whether it's coming in from Mexico. If we're going to put money into it from the state, like I say, I think it should be put into where the root cause is.
And I'd like to just follow up on that. I know I thought initially that the percentage of folks who became addicted to opioids maybe a 20 percentile range would be ones that were on painkillers that were opioid based, but they tell me the number is much higher than that and somewhere in the 80 percentile range, which is pretty disturbing. And so some of the blame, I suppose, could be on the drug prescribing, as Jake mentioned earlier. But I also want to say that as a nation, we've demanded, painkillers for our pain, and so it's a cultural thing as well. And so that doesn't make it right by any means. But I just wanted to make that comment that that stuff we want relief from pain, and so we need to find different ways to do that, certainly. And so the other thing that we did, and this wasn't this past session, it was the session before, is limit the amount of, so you might get 7 days worth the first time through, and then it was cut off and you had to go back. And so trying to do our best to make sure that 80 percentile portion is curtailed in the future, certainly.
There have been towns, municipalities, counties that have decided the same way. Some of them banded together to file suit against the tobacco companies years ago, that they're going to file suit against the pharmaceutical companies.
Sure.
Is that something that the state of Indiana should get involved in?
I think there's some talk about it, certainly. If there were criminal activity and folks knew about the effects of opioids, then it's certainly possible. I would leave it at that. As a manufacturer, just like the tobacco companies, if they were complicit and knew that there were things that could cause folks to have cancer or there were health effects, then the answer is yes. Initially, I'm mixed a little bit on that. But at the same time, if they're, as I said, if they're guilty of propagating something that they knew that would cause some long-term effects, then the answer is probably yes.
Well, on that part too, I don't know whether I'd go that far as filing lawsuits. I don't really see anything good coming out of lawsuits other than people spending a lot of money, and the courts are going to decide what they feel is best regardless of that. If the drug company's out there wanting to push a certain product, and that product, like you say, is going to cause someone injury, then I would say we'd be able to file some type of lawsuit on that. But just to file a lawsuit, no, I wouldn't go with that.
You're watching the In Focus Candidate Forum on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're speaking with candidates running for Indiana State Senate, District 27, Jake Hogue on the Democrat side, Jeff Rotz on the Republican side. I'm going to follow up, Jake, with something that you said where you suggested maybe counties should handle this a little bit more on their own, make it a little bit more local. There's been a problem here in Wayne County in that they started, and it wasn't necessarily for opioids, but it was to try to lower the epidemic of hepatitis C and some other things. They started a needle exchange program. They weren't the first ones in Indiana to do it, probably won't be the last ones, but there's some pushback between the commissioners and the prosecutor about being able to hand out syringes, needles. If this is going to be dealt with, it would need to come on the law side, probably. Mm-hmm. Is there something that the state of Indiana should do through legislation to make this easier in counties if they are going to handle this situation and they decide because of a public health issue, this is an avenue they need to take? The prosecutor's not necessarily doing anything wrong, the commissioners aren't doing anything wrong, but there's a pushback there. Yeah. Is there something that through legislation the General Assembly should do in cases like this?
On that part there, honestly, I think the state legislatures, they need to stay out of that part of it there. That's, like I say, I'll push back to that where I think the counties should handle that on their own. If they feel that they need to set up certain programs or whatever they need to do to get accomplished what they want to get accomplished there, then that should be their decisions there. I was never a big fan of, say, Jeff here is using a syringe to shoot something up and then okay, here's a different syringe, a brand new one, just so you don't give it to someone else and give that person hepatitis C or something. I just don't agree with that. That's just something I don't think should be happening. Just handing out needles just to do that.
Okay.
So the General Assembly gave the counties carte blanche ability to be able to invoke the needle exchange program, and I'll share very similar to what Mr. Hogue has shared. And so I have lived my life, I was taught and lived my life that the end never justifies the means. And so it's absolutely as important as how you get there as getting there. So my initial response was propagating illegal activity is never right. And so and I would say that's probably where the prosecutor and the attorney general are against it, right? And so you can't hardly argue that, right? I mean, if we're giving somebody something to use to do something illegal, that's not right. The other part of it is, though, the cost medically to society for folks who end up with maybe Hep C or, heaven forbid, HIV, that are possible terminal illnesses, and the cost to all of society because of that was the reason I supported it, and that was the only reason, because as I said, I have always lived my life. For the most part, how you get there is every bit as important as being there. So that's the dilemma, and it's a difficult issue, and there are people on both sides of it, and that's where it's at. And so, given the locals the ability to do it, I think, as Jake mentioned, it probably was a good idea.
So, the General Assembly gave the counties the opportunity to do this.
Correct.
But they haven't affected what those who enforce the law believe as far as this being right or wrong. Is there something in legislation that needs to be said or done so that those on the law enforcement side can take a step back and allow the public health side to work? Because right now there's been an issue created because you gave them a right that is against the law.
Well, I would come back and say I'm not certain it's absolutely against the law. Now, I probably would, the prosecutors may disagree with me on that, but to give you something isn't against the law, but giving it to you knowing that you're going to use it for a specific purpose could be construed as being against the law, and that's where the dilemma is at. And so we're not seeing the Attorney General or the local prosecutor, and I know down in Dearborn County, Aaron Negengard is also not a fan of the needle exchange program, but they're not prosecuting people for it. But they're certainly looking at, so I'm saying we gave the counties the ability to do it, but there has been proof of, that needles that have been given to folks have been used more than once, and so been found laying around and things like that. And so it's a dilemma. There's no two ways about it. It's walking a very tight rope and trying to help people.
Like I say, my opinion is that the law they never should have been given the handout. As far as any type of legislation that the state could do, I really don't think that's something that the state should put out there. Like I say, what that needs to happen is we need to get back as to why is this happening and try and fix that problem first. And if you fix that problem, then the use of the syringes should go away when you fix that problem.
You're watching the In Focus Candidate Forum on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, taking your questions, 973-8587, or on Facebook or on Twitter at WCTV Info. We do have a chat question, so let's bring that up. There's a question on the ballot statewide that would require the General Assembly to adopt a balanced budget. Can the candidates talk about what they know about this constitutional amendment and whether they support its passage or not, and why? There is actually going to be on the ballot And actually, I was in a conversation earlier today. This has to do actually, I think, with a Senate resolution that passed.
The Senate Joint Resolution 7, you bet. So first of all, I'll say that I have supported it both times. In order to affect the Constitution, it has to go through the General Assembly 2 times, and then it goes to the ballot, which we'll all have the opportunity to vote on November 6th. And so the reason recently I had been approached by someone that was very concerned about school pensions and essentially teacher pensions, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so I'll share in depth very quickly. It's a very simple resolution. It's about a page of written language, and that's basically it. So first of all, I think we in Indiana need to be proud that we have never, or we don't spend more than what we have coming in. So we've been very prudent fiscally, and I expect that to continue. So here's the gist behind it. What Senate Resolution 7, joint resolution, so it went through the House and the Senate, what it basically says is, let's start where we are before, if this thing were not to pass. So today, let's say our projected revenues are falling short, and they're falling shorter than the expenditures that we have. A simple majority in either the House or the Senate, so we're looking at 26 votes in the Senate and 51 votes in the House, we can then take measures to either borrow money or cut money from different parts of the budget in order to make up the shortfall. So what this resolution, including pensions, we could do that today.
Okay.
Maybe we did that for a year, right? We didn't put the full amount of requirement for that pension or other parts of the budget in order to make up the shortfall to cover where we need to go. But what this amendment does is it requires a supermajority, so 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate have to vote in favor. If there's a shortfall, we have to convene and 2/3 vote in order to make sure that we're meeting our expenditures based on the revenues. And so the issue is that there's some fear out there that we're going to raid pension funds. First, let me say we're as good as any state in the nation and better than most. We're probably in the top 2 or 3 that have funded pensions to a level that's acceptable. I read an article early this week, and I believe it was California, that said, hang on, those who are under state pensions, because you're going to get cut 10% or 50% because they have not kept up with the actuarial funding to make sure that they could cover it. And Indiana actually fell into that place in pre-1996. The original pension fund was set up and said that we're just going to pay as we go. So what ended up happening was the expenditure continued to grow as people retired. It became almost unmanageable, so we stopped that one and began a new one that was actuarially funded. Not to use that word is hard to say, but presently today, because of that issue, there's almost $1 billion in the budget every year that goes to fund that pension that we didn't do properly. So what I'm saying is Indiana's done very well, and we've always maintained. In fact, that budget amendment says we must take care of the pension fund. The only way we don't is if a supermajority were to vote to maintain some other things. And so we're not raiding pension funds. We're much better off than most of the states because of our fiscal prudence. And so the fear, this actually sets an additional level in place to protect the pension funds. And so I support it. I think it's the right thing to do. And I think it sets the bar higher to protect, I know it does, the pension funds.
I just learned about this amendment here just about 2 or 3 days ago, so I haven't had time to actually take a look at what it's all really about. But if I was the state legislator going up there, number one, that would be a top priority year after year after year to make sure that that budget is balanced. I mean, to put a constitutional amendment out there to make sure that that does happen, then I'd say the elected officials we put in there, they aren't doing their job. Plain and simple. So, I mean, that's my opinion. So, would I support that amendment? Probably not. I don't think it's needed. Because once you put a constitutional amendment in there, 5 or 10 years down the road, if it turns out it ain't any good, you're going to have a hard time getting that repealed. So, why put it in there to start with?
And so if I could just say the comment on that, and I function, I think, probably the same premise that you do, that we just go and do the right thing, right? We don't spend more than what we have. But essentially, this just says, look, if our projected revenue falls short of where we're at and we end up in trouble anytime during the year, then the General Assembly has to convene, and it has to be a 2/3 vote to go beyond and spend more than what we have coming in. And so it's an emergency, if you will, protection that's only invoked should that happen.
Over the past decade, we've seen legislative initiatives geared toward holding our public schools more publicly accountable for their performance. However, during the same period of time, we've seen increasing legislative support and the channeling of public taxpayer dollars to charter and choice schools that are not held to the same level of accountability as their public counterparts. Would you support legislation or regulations that would attempt to level this playing field and hold all schools, charter and choice, as well as public, to the same standards of transparent accountability? Jake, we'll start with you.
If the state is providing money to whatever school, private, charter, public school, then yeah, I mean, they all need to be held to the same standards. There shouldn't be this one here, well, it's doing a little better, so we'll provide a little more money or whatever for that. It should just come down to that. If you're providing taxpayer money for any of these schools, then they all need to be accountable for the same exact thing. I mean, I wouldn't see anything different about that.
This is a difficult question. There's no two ways about it. One we grapple with in the state all the time. And so I'd like to begin to say that the differences in accountability are fairly minimal. Now, I would have people that would disagree with me on that, and that's perfectly okay. But I also would say that there's a disparity in the amount of money, and so that goes to the school systems per student. So the number is it's less than half that goes that follows a student to a school of choice, whether it be charter or whether it be a voucher school, versus what public school gets. And so I like to go back and say, listen, it's about educating students. And so we can talk about the disparity in money, which is there's a pretty great, a large divide. The average across the state's about $11,000 per student. That is state granted money. It's also local property tax. And then there's some money that comes to the federal government that goes direct to schools. And so a voucher or charter is about 90% of the state amount, which equates to about $4,000. And so there's a large disparity. And I sat down with a guy one day and we went through all these numbers, and I said, okay, if we're gonna, the differences in accountability, which are minimal, but it is an issue, and I can grant that. I said, if we do that, then let's level the playing field money-wise and overall, and then it becomes a non-starter. So those schools were started because if we go back 10 or 15 years, we were graduating students that couldn't read or write. And so there was a major problem. Doesn't mean that the teachers weren't doing their job, but just some students were falling through the cracks. And so some thought across the United States that if there were competition, it may see schools raise the bar. And that's happened in some respects. Has it worked as good as it could have? The answer is no. But those are the reasons why we have standardized testing that's mandated by the federal government, because we looked at our standings internationally, and we've fallen greatly from the top of the heap to somewhere in the middle. We're like 25 or 23 in the world, and that is very concerning. And so whether we're on the right track or not, totally, I'd probably say no. But nonetheless, we tried some things, and we are where we're at, and we still have a long ways to go.
That's something there you touched on about some of the kids falling through the cracks there. I went to a private school my freshman and sophomore year. In our class, there was maybe 15 to 20 kids per class. Now you get into a public school. I'm not exactly sure about the charter schools or private schools anymore. I'm sure their classroom size has increased also, but in a public school, you're probably looking at least 30, I would think, per classroom there. If we got these kids that are the schools, whether they're public, private, charter, whatever, if they see kids there that they know aren't performing where they should, that's something where I think the state actually ought to step in and say, do we need to put a little bit more money into that if that is going to help bring these kids up to where they are, or should we just let it as is? I'd just like to see the kids who do have the ability there that are a little bit behind, that we give them just a little bit better help or whatever you want to call it to try and bring them up to the standards where they should be.
Staying with schools. The recently enacted Graduation Pathways program came with governmental directive for its implementation, but without full state funding support. Do you think that the state should assist in the payment of the additional costs incurred at the local level for the implementation of this program?
My turn?
I think it's your turn.
Okay, that's fine.
I've lost.
Yeah, I was thinking there for a minute. So the testing requirement that is required for students now, that is covered by the state for the first time through. So if a student wants to graduate using the college entrance exam, whichever we choose as a state or whatever the superintendent of public instruction chooses through RFP, then the state will cover that. So that's an automatic for a student to graduate. I'm of the impression, in looking at that thing, I honestly have never had this conversation that there's a shortfall or mandates from the state when it comes to the grad pathways that require extra money for students to graduate. The testing procedures are going to be covered, but what we were really trying to do is provide flexibility for students to follow pathways that would best suit them. And so when I say that, I'm saying you could take the ASVAB test. Maybe you're headed to the military, and that's what you want to do for your career, or at least temporarily out of high school. The ASVAB test would cover the graduation requirement. There's probably 7 items, I think, of different ways that you can do that, and some had career tech ed as a pathway, a certificate as well. To graduate, and so a lot of that stuff is already being done. It looks a little bit different because of the way we aligned the thing, but the cost, it's just not been anything that has come up in the conversations I've had, because most of that stuff we're already doing. We just gave the ability, instead of, currently there's a cohort that has to take end of course assessments, and they have to take it until they get a passing grade. So a 10th grader may have to take a test. Thank God most of them, I'm certain, make it the first time through, but they have to take it multiple times until they pass it, because that's the only way that they get to graduate. Now we've opened up and said there's 6 or 7 ways, and most of those ways are already happening in high schools. It's just these are ways that can get them graduated as a certificate. Like I mentioned, the military could be a career tech ed pathway. And so in my perspective, we've eased the burden with the students in mind.
I'm not real familiar with that part of it there, but I'd have to agree with what you're saying there, Jeff. But the other thing, too, that we need to look at there is a lot of kids first thing they think about is I got to go to a college to get a good job. Today, yeah, there's probably a majority of them that need to do that, but there's still things out there that we need to get the kids educated on. I know, like, take a car to a dealership or whatever nowadays. They got to go to school. They got to learn how to do all that. There's a lot of electronics in that. Welding, that's something that needs to be out there. People are still going to need welding. That's something where we ought to put a little bit of money into more technical schools to help those people get that opportunity to try and achieve those jobs there.
You're watching the In Focus Candidate Forum on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, speaking with candidates running for State Senate District 27, Jeff Rotz, Jake Hogue. Let's stay with education. Earlier this month, State Senator Eddie Melton announced that he's planning on bringing a proposal into the legislature in 2019, proposing to raise teacher salaries by allocating additional funds to the school funding formula in the upcoming budget to show teachers that we value their hard work. He says that teacher salaries in Indiana have remained stagnant with respect to inflation since 2009. We all say that teachers are important. There's a teacher shortage. And teachers are looking, while everybody says, and we talk to a number of different school boards, and the line is, nobody got into this to get rich, but nobody got into this to be poor necessarily also, and they would like their wages to go up. And since the state is in charge of that, how does the state cover some additional money for teacher salaries? And how do they make that right?
Well, I guess I'll go first on that. And,
Yes.
Yes, I believe that teachers, they are definitely deserving of a raise of some type, whether it be 1%, 5%, 10%, or whatever. That needs to be discussed. Because I know I wouldn't want to be in there teaching those kids everything, and I greatly appreciate the teachers for doing that. But as far as trying to appropriate money for that, I'm still a firm believer that there's a lot in that budget that can be cut out tremendously to help support that pay raise there. And I know I read a little article already from the Republicans, what they're wanting to do here probably next year, which I agree with. They're trying to get the people who are like on low-income housing and all that. They need to be, if they're capable of working, we need to get them out there and doing something. If they do nothing more than just going to the local business here and cleaning the windows, cleaning the floors, or whatever they can do to help support the pay that we're giving them. So either one way or another, maybe the local businesses or whoever, instead of us, the state, giving them money to support them there, maybe the local businesses, they could actually say, okay, maybe we could hire you for 3 hours a week, 4 hours, or 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. And maybe these people then, they can start supporting themselves there, where we could take that money back out and put it into something more usable or more efficient.
Teacher pay raises and how to fund them.
It's an interesting issue, and so certainly teachers are well worth their wages. There are no two ways about it. So we look back, the whole system was changed far before my time serving in the General Assembly. But let's answer the question. First of all, look at how the corporations get money. So the state, they get local tax dollars, and then we send them. The state sends them X amount of dollars per student, and then they get some monies direct from the federal government, and then there's some money that funnels through the state to get to finish up with the total amount that they get. Traditionally, the state has not gotten involved in directing money to the teachers, saying, meaning we don't say, you have to pay someone who has 10 years experience X dollar, X amount. It's left up to because we send the money to the school districts, it's left up to the school boards, certainly the chief financial officer and the superintendent, and then of course the collective bargaining that goes on with the union. And so to say that we haven't sent money to the schools wouldn't be right. And we've stayed back from dictating how much has to go to teachers. We could do that, but it would take the control away from the locals. Is there conversation going on? You betcha. I was on a 1 hour phone call today talking about ways that we might be able to assist the teachers. And gosh, I say all that stuff. I know that this nation, nor the state of Indiana or Wayne County or any of the counties in this district, if we don't do a good job educating children, we're all in trouble. And so it's absolutely necessary, and we spend half of the state's budget on education. Have we done the best job? I would be the first to tell you we haven't. Professionalizing the teacher profession. But I also would like to say that there's a shortage across the board in professional. We talked about it with mental health professionals trying to deal with the opioid epidemic. And so several years ago we passed a bill that gave $7,500 per student per year for students who would come in and pledge to teach. And so I interviewed, there were 200 kids across the state, and I interviewed some right here in Wayne County, and I was astounded at the capacity of those young ladies and men that came, and we interviewed for those scholarships. And so we're doing some things. We need to do a lot more. There's no doubt about it. And this created or the divide, in some ways, it's a narrative, I think, anyway, that is out there that the General Assembly is not against the teaching profession. We know they do a great job, and as you mentioned, they do it because that's what they were called to do, if you will, and they love to do it. You got a guy right here in your staff here that does it, and it's incredible. And so that's the long and short of my answer. Can we do a better job? The answer is yes. Exactly how the General Assembly does it without dictating to the local school districts is the dilemma.
Okay. We've got about 6 minutes left to go. Did you want to jump back in?
No,
Okay.
I'm good. Yeah.
There's a chat question that came in. We want to definitely try to get to that, and then we'll see if we can come up with a couple of very quick ones. So,
6 minutes left.
Yep. Would each candidate discuss their thoughts on legislative attempts to end township government, and if they would support legislation to abolish township government if it was proposed? This has come up on a couple of different times, so we'll start with you.
Came up first last year, and I'll give you a very quick answer. I have serious concerns about eliminating township government. There are probably some efficiencies that could be created should we do that, but I have very grave concerns about volunteer local fire departments and how the jurisdiction would work there, and so it's one that brings unease to me.
I'm totally against doing away with it. I don't think people know what the township trustees actually do. Like Jeff says, there's fire departments involved. I think schools are probably involved to some degree. There's people out there who may be on their last leg that month.
Yep.
If they can prove that they are on their last leg that month, the township trustee, he will investigate that, and if he feels that they need a little help, township trustee will help.
Okay. It's going to be a little difficult to be on a quick yes or no answer, but as close as possible. Do you believe that the government should interfere in a pregnant person's health care decisions?
No. That's totally up to the individual, whatever they want to do.
As a Christian man and having gone through some horrible experience in my life, the answer is I'm against abortion. Now, I'm pro-life, and could there be circumstances that are extreme that would cause something like that? I can't. There certainly is a gray area there, but because of my beliefs and my experiences in life, I'm pro-life.
Should the state legislature expand laws that allow firearms to be carried almost any place? There are places where churches, things of that nature, can say, we don't want guns in. Should there be state laws that say, no, you don't have the right to make that determination? Should it be concealed carry wherever it is that you want to conceal carry?
Well, I think it's probably already happening in a lot of cases. I had I'll laugh and say this, I'll try to be as quick as I can. Someone I was speaking to one day said, well, I don't want to go into Walmart if I knew people were carrying. Well, I guarantee you there's people in grocery stores, Walmart or wherever it's at, that are carrying concealed weapons. But I also would say that we need to respect the wishes of the people, such as a church. If there's a wish that the individual doesn't, or the pastor or the board of a church doesn't want weapons in the church, I think that needs to be respected.
Well, I'm a Democrat, and I know Democrats get beat up for being against guns and whatnot all, but I do have a concealed carry permit. The only reason I got that is I have 30 acres I can walk across. There's wild animals out there, and I just want to be on the safe side there, and for other various reasons. You just don't know anymore. And as far as, like Jeff said, if a church says, we don't want you to bring any type of a weapon into our church here, I'd have to agree with that too. That is up to each individual store, each church, the community itself, basically.
And last, real quickly, with the technology that's available to us, should the state consider mandating hands-free devices for phone use while driving?
I'd have to think on that in a little bit, but my first initial response would probably have to be no. I mean, you can have a phone there set up on your truck or car or whatever, and you can be talking to it, but you're concentrating on what you're talking about versus what's out there in front of you. And other people's lives are more important than what you're saying on that phone.
I've had it proposed to me before, and I have never said no, but there would need to be a great deal of debate on the pros and cons, and Mr. Hogue brings up a good comment. I mean, crashes happen because people are playing with the radio, or you're still got to dial your phone. Hopefully, as technology continues, or we catch up with it, maybe in our automobiles, right, we can say, call Eric, right, and the phone will dial you and we'll be all set. But still, it's a distraction, certainly. But again, a lot of debate. There has not been a bill that's come up in the 4 years I've been there to do so. I know there are some states that do prohibit, or it's hands-free, a hands-free law, if you will.
Okay, thank you both very much. Jake Hogue, Jeff Rotz, running for Indiana Senate District 27 on your ballot. Hopefully you get there. Real quickly, we're going to put up the slide that will show you when the vote centers are open there, and then the vote centers that are open on Election Day. And very quickly, we're going to put up, because I know everybody cares, the trick-or-treat times, because that's what's happening. And while that's up, I'll tell you, we are going to be here on election night, beginning at 6 p.m. I hope you will join us for that. I'll be joined by Melissa Vance. Thanks for watching tonight's In Focus Candidate Forum. Have a great weekend.